Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Hairston with SS&C Blue Prism. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest Fabiano Lopes, a managing director with the global advisory firm FTI Consulting. Fabiano was on the show 2 years ago talking with us about automation in the BPO industry. And today, he and I will be discussing his thoughts on citizen development. Fabiano, welcome back to the podcast. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Brad. I'm glad to be here. I'm a managing director, as you mentioned, with FTI. I've been with the firm for a little bit over a year now, and my focus here is enterprise-wide transformation, which includes, among other things, automation, systems enhancements on that space. So glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, Fabiano, the citizen developer terminology gets thrown around a lot these days. I'm sure you would agree. And not just with regard to automation. You hear about citizen data scientists, for example, when you talk about analytical tools like Alteryx and Data Robot. Gartner has even forecasted that by 2023, the number of active citizen developers at large enterprises will be at least 4 times the number of professional developers. So perhaps we could just start by level setting on what citizen development is in the automation realm and why it is such a hot topic.
So citizen development, in my view, are what I call functional experts or functional people, finance, HR, procurement, that are interested in automation. They are willing to develop and learn a little bit about programming and how to configure a bot and how to implement and deploy a bot within their work environment and work scope to improve their performance, right? So we have the ability today. One a good example is Office 365. They got these little Power Automate bots in there that anyone who has a subscription to it can get access, and they can learn and they can deploy their little bots in their report building or something that is usually simpler. Let's call it ability to do macro on steroids, right? And
Okay.
And that is usually confined in their task or their workspace.
Okay.
And I think it's growing, and as Gartner mentioned, it's going to be 4 times the size, mainly because these new generations that are coming into the workforce, they not only are more comfortable with technology, but they do have access to that technology. So if we think about Alteryx or Power BI and tools like that are generally available to the entire population of the company, it's there. They can use it. They can quickly learn. There's a lot of like self-teaching videos and YouTube and so forth, and they develop those capabilities and they bring it to the workforce.
Fabiano, I recently interviewed the co-authors of a soon-to-be released book focused on real-life human-machine collaboration. And one of the observations they made during their research is that the typical business employee today is much more technical in nature, which I would agree with. Given that, I do want to ask a follow-up on the citizen developer front. Would you say the average citizen developer is not someone with coding experience, never took a programming class in college, for example?
I think so, because a lot of the tools today, Blue Prism is a good example where you don't really have to code, right? I remember when I started in working, we would go into the computer and write codes and basically spend hours developing line by line and think through the logic and and workflows and all of that stuff. The tools today allow you to do that much quicker, faster, using simple logics and simple user interfaces that allow these people to basically be more worried about the task and the logic rather than languages, right? C, C plus, basic, or whatever
Right.
language you can think through today.
Okay. Fabiano, do you think having a good citizen development program is critical to developing a culture of automation within an organization?
Yes. Uh, so I think a lot of the companies today and a lot of my clients are in that space.
Mm.
They haven't explored that power, right? Because the programs when it comes to automation, it's still coming from top down as a more structured program. And when we talk about system development, you gotta decentralize that capability and that skills. We can talk a little bit more about how you control that, right? But
Mhm.
but that capability to bring the workforce towards like automation is growing, it's coming, and it's a wave that is going to be very hard to stop.
Fabiano, I once interviewed a guy named Mark Settle, who's a seven-time CIO and author. And he said that while citizen development is not easy to put in place, it really can be a force multiplier within automation programs. His rationale was IT groups are never going to obtain the headcount, nor are business operations teams ever going to have the bandwidth to address all of the low risk, high reward automation opportunities within a modern enterprise. Do you agree with this point of view?
I do, right? So if we think about the the development that the citizens are doing are task oriented, right? So I know for sure what report I have to deliver and when, and I know how to configure a let's say an Excel to read from a database, and it will create a chart for a PowerPoint, right? So
Mhm.
so those very simple tasks that I have to do every week can be deployed there, and it's a low risk, right? So I have an example of one of my clients. Uh, we put together a tool leveraging simple automation that every Monday morning when she would come to work, she would press play and
Mhm.
automatically would generate 21 reports. She didn't put the reports, but she would get the report and she would email to 21 different groups.
Mhm.
So it's much simpler, right? So I come in, I press play, and I automatically get a report from an email,
Mhm.
download it, and upload to 21 different emails
Right.
and send it,
Right.
right? So
Mhm.
that little task is low risk, makes her job a lot more efficient,
Mhm.
and it's very simple to construct with the appropriate tools, right?
Right.
What I think this does not do is when the task at hand is more complex than just sending reports, right?
Mhm.
So there is an inability there to see the overall process.
Mhm.
So people that are doing those little like incremental changes
Right.
are not sometimes able to see the ability to do a step change. So thinking about the report, she never is going in that situation, that person is never going to ask whether 21 report is an efficient way
Mhm.
and whether the report that comes in is built on an efficient way. And that's
Mm.
where the citizens development end, I think, is when you start having to look beyond that desktop capability.
Mhm. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So what are some ways citizen development can go awry?
So one very typical, right? So you imagine you have, let's say, a finance department that has about 1,000 people, and these 1,000 people, each one developing their own little bot here, little bot there. So usually people tend to move to build automation on the tasks that are not in their comfort zone, right? Or it's laborious, and you start having a humongous amount of those little bots spread. Usually there are costs associated with it, and there's very little leverage of that knowledge, right?
Right.
So
Right.
one of the problems that we see is if you're stuck on your laptop, you don't leverage across. The other thing is sometimes that thing can be very complex, but the person doesn't realize that it requires a different set of automations. So some of the ones like Blueprints can bring to it, which is the whole infrastructure that IT can bring to it, right? A cloud and access to an normal bot. But that person doesn't realize that it may cost you more to run those little bots all over the place than consolidate that into a more structured automation system and process improvement.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's where I think the gap is. Depending if you start deploying these little things all over the place and there is not a standard. So imagine, right, you've got 3 or 4 different brands of desktop automation out there that are more commonly used. We we have to ensure that the cost doesn't go uh, out of the door, right? Because if you don't control that, that can become really, really expensive at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So we talked about how citizen development can sometimes go awry. What about the flip side? What are some best practices that you've seen in your experience as a consultant that have helped companies really thrive with this type of program?
So I think one of the best practices to avoid some of these crazy things related to automation would be a centralized governance body where we would have, and you can call it COE, right? But where we would have a control, a little bit of control over the citizens' development capabilities, at least knowing what they've been doing, where they are deploying. So you can identify some patterns to bring that to a higher level in case there is an opportunity to leverage across departments, across processes, and so forth. And at the same time, control and manage the overall automation strategy of the firm, where leverages more robust automation systems that can really, really bring what I call a step change to automation, right? Because citizens development brings a lot of the incremental, as we mentioned before. But for you to get to a real step change within the organization, you really need to have a strategy for automation that brings both to the optimum situation, right?
Yep.
So I have a
Yep.
I have a story that's really interesting. So there was this guy, right when you start getting into the business of developing tools, right? Developing automation on your computer. So this guy, he had, I don't know, a $70,000, $80,000 job to do for a company. It was very transactional. So he goes in, he buys a bot, he installs the bot would do the work for him, and he would stay at the beach or the pool drinking. So the question, and they ended up finding that out, and they fired the guy. And I was reflecting, I think we had a conversation about this before. Should they have fired the guy or just moved him to a role where he could deploy this knowledge into
Right.
other company departments or other processes, right? So it's interesting because he learned, he deployed, he saved the company process time, but he basically didn't communicate out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was interesting. So that type of guidance should come from the COE, right? So
Yeah.
so we the COE gets to know and address some of the the good things that automation can bring to the company.
Fabiano, if a company is looking to grow their citizen developer population, what are some qualities they should look for in their employees to identify good candidates?
I think they have to be very analytical and think structurally, right?
Okay.
The logic behind programming a bot has to be either natural or developed by the
Hmm.
person, right?
Okay.
There is there is also a need to be very comfortable with technology.
Hmm.
So ability to self-learn and understand how that technology can help him or the company to perform better.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think that a sense of curiosity, a sense
Hmm.
of like, what can I do differently to get me to a better position, grow, or even help my company in deploy this knowledge into other areas. So willingness to share in and actually be more accountable for the work that
Hmm.
that person performs, right?
Right.
And I think this generation, they have that ability, right? They are growing already knowing technology, iPad, iPhone. I see very little kids nowadays, right? The young guys and girls that are coming into the workforce. I see them less and less going with paper books. It's always iPad and iPhone and
Hmm.
ability to do much more in the computer. This generation is a it's a learning. They're
Yeah.
desperate for technology things, and I think we will do us harm if we not provide that ability.
Yeah.
Here at FTI, we have 3 or 4 junior consultants that I brought into my little group of tools development, and we are looking into getting them into understanding a lot more of the little tools for citizens development, so we can help our
Hmm.
clients specifically in that need
Right.
where they have, oh, there is this task and I want to bring just a little quick
Hmm.
and dirt automation. We can get it there for you. Practically costs very little and bring
Hmm.
a huge benefit because it's already there, right? Available
Right.
for them.
Yeah.
And here we are trying to get that knowledge across as well,
Hmm.
not only to our clients, but also to ourselves.
Fabiano, you co-authored a book that was released earlier this year about artificial intelligence, and it's only in Portuguese, so I haven't read it, or nor can I read it. But I have to ask: is citizen development a topic in your book?
Yes. So the focus of the book was to discuss labor laws across different countries, right? So we had
Mhm.
people from Brazil, from Argentina, from Portugal, Russia, US, and the key was to understand how automation is impacting labor laws across the planet. And obviously, citizens development is a key element that is impacting labor laws, right?
Mhm.
So, an example, if I develop a bot and that bot works after hours, do I do I get compensated for working after hours or
Right.
not? So
Right.
so these are some of the questions that we put it on the table, uh, especially in countries where after hours and the laws around labor are very, I would say, don't want to say restrictive, but
Mhm.
are more conservative in a sense,
Right.
where there's have to be a question around a bot should it pay tax or not, right? And what portion of the the automation effort developed by citizens can impact compensation, can impact employability, and so forth.
Mhm. Okay. Interesting. Well, when it comes out in English, let me know. I'll give it a read.
Definitely will.
Fabiano, as we close, let me just ask you, what impact do you think citizen development will have in general on intelligent automation in terms of adoption, for example?
I think it's going to be huge. I like the idea of letting people own
Mhm.
the development. So I think the as the younger generation are coming in, more and more bots are going to be coming, right? Because there's a crossing here, right? Bots are getting easier and cheaper. And at the same time, the people are getting that knowledge. That said, there is a limit to it, as we discussed. When we start getting to the complexity of large processes, more complex processes, that can really cut your development, right? Cut your so you gotta have from the start a very good governance process. And I would suggest companies to start thinking about that now, because people are going to find out that every computer that has a Office 365 or even a Google Cloud or Azure, they all have little automation hidden behind it, right?
Right.
It's very important that these companies start taking control of them and identifying when it's time to bring a more robust set of automation to the table. Because things can get really, really expensive if you don't manage well the citizens development portion of it.
Yeah, no doubt. What about the impact of citizen development on moving companies from basic RPA to intelligent automation? Is there a linkage there?
There is, but I think the progression is going to be different. I think the more and more the RPAs are going to get stuck into the citizens development level, and cognitive AI and other more advanced stuff is going to get centralized and coordinated, right? And because of the complexity of deploying and managing those tasks, right? Now, I don't think that the citizens development eventually is going to go beyond the desktop. I think there is a limitation there. Now, can cognitive go down to the desktop or AI? Yes. And I think that can come from the centralized, or it can even be self-developed, right? So a good example is Alteryx and some of these advanced analytics tools. They already are at your fingertips in your computer, right? So that can expand, is especially in the analytic space, right? Where you have cheap tools, databases are now pretty much accessible in any last generation computer.
Got it.
So it's going to be an interesting thing to see how that shapes, because I think companies like Blue Prism are going to have to go more towards the cognitive and advanced analytics to maintain the army or the structure behind it, but also going to have to be able to go down to the desktop automation. So I think it's going to have to be a mingle there.
Yeah, agreed. Well, Fabiano, thank you for returning to the podcast. It was great having you on the show again. And I really appreciate all of your thoughts on the citizen development topic. I also want to mention that Blue Prism is hosting a LinkedIn Live session focused on citizen development on September 20th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I will include a link to this event in the show notes for those of you that are interested. Thanks again to everyone for joining today. And Fabiano, all the best, my friend.
Thanks. I appreciate being here, and I look forward to talk to you again.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.